I learned that courage was not the absence of fear, but the triumph over it. The brave man is not he who does not feel afraid, but he who conquers that fear. Nelson Mandela. All right. Welcome to another episode of the Liberty Dad podcast. And it is not the morning time. It is not the butt crack of dawn at 7 a.m. It is 8 p.m., almost past my bedtime, but I think I will make it. Tonight, I have a special episode. We're going to bring on Caryn Ann Harlos. We're going to talk about masculinity. Men out there, unfortunately, there's a serious conversation that needs to be had. So we're going to have it. Also, I will tell you this. Normally on this show, I keep it family friendly. However, tonight, because it's in the evening, might have had a drink or two, I'm just going to say might get a little gritty. So just going to give you that warning. If you're used to the show and you're used to having your kids around, listening to all the politics, because I know all your toddlers love hearing about whatever ramblings I've got at 7 a.m. in the morning. But if you're used to that, I'm going to give you a fair warning now. Maybe might want to cover their ears or send them to go play like I did. I told my son, I was like, all right, here you go. Some Minecraft for you. So tonight we're going to bring on Caryn Ann Harlos. We're going to talk about masculinity. And she has a very interesting story and then a very interesting response to that story on Twitter. So let's go ahead and bring on Caryn Ann. Caryn Ann, how are you?
I got my headphones to work, by the way.
Oh, perfect. Look at that. That's awesome.
Well, and you forgot in your intro that you can't have a family friendly show with me on. Like that just wasn't going to happen.
Well, we could have tried. I mean, like, it's always that.
Yeah.
So
Yeah, we not with me. You know how it goes. I could try for a while, but no
right.
guarantees.
I got you. Okay, so let's start this off. Let's get into it right away. Tell us about the story that ignited all of this.
The story that launched 1,000 trolls. Actually, this is the most viral that I'd ever gone. It hasn't really gone viral, but for me, because I swim in a very small pond, and it's not the first time I've told a similar story, which is funny.
Right.
So I ride the train to work to Denver. I live in the suburbs. I ride the train to work to Denver. The trains in Denver aren't that bad, but every once in a while there's trouble. I mean, that's just the way it is in public transportation. So it's early in the morning. There were young men or youngish, we weren't talking about elderly men on their way to work or whatever they might be doing, younger, strapping young men on the train with me when all of a sudden this much older, either very drunk or very drug addled. I don't like using the word bum, but everyone knows what I mean when I say the word bum. I'm not trying to dehumanize anybody. But so this drug addled bum gets on and zeroes in on this maybe late 20-something-year-old girl who's just sitting there. She's not doing anything. She's just sitting there. And he starts screaming obscenities at her, like calling her the B word, like everything. Like, I'm not saying it. You can imagine it. He just, you effing B. She didn't do anything. And all these guys are sitting around on the train. And most of them just looking out the window. Like I don't see this. This guy's not a big guy. Obviously, anyone could be dangerous, but we're not talking about Muhammad Ali coming on the plane. We're talking about a frail bum coming on the train and just picking on this lady who's probably somebody's mother. She's right in that age range. She probably had kids and didn't say a word. Didn't say a word. So I said, because this is the second time something like this has happened, I'm going to tell the prior story because it relates, where I said, this happened again on the train, XXX, and the men did nothing.
Right.
But let's go back to the prior story. Now, the prior story happened again, on the train, we're all just sitting there, and there is this gangbanger on the train. Okay, it had the black teardrop, everything, like a scary looking dude. So we were all worried about this guy on the train, and a couple other bum type people come in and hang out like in the doorwell, and all of a sudden this sickening smell, which I didn't recognize, started filling the train, and this gangbanger got over there and he's screaming at them, what the bleep 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 do you think you're doing? You're
Right.
putting up a crack pipe on this train in front of all these people, including women and children. And he's like, you are getting off on the next stop. You hear me? You're stopping this. And they got off on the next stop and then threw some words at him as they're getting off. And then he bounded off. And we can just imagine what happened after that. But what a contrast. The respectable, upstanding man that I wouldn't have thought twice about getting on a train with did absolutely nothing, while this
Right.
young woman was verbally, just abused
Right.
this guy. And meanwhile, talk about judging by appearances. This gangbanger cared more about the average person on the train than these young men, and it just was such a shock to me. Now, other people have said, "Well, what did you do?" Well, this story was about men, and I sarcastically said, "Well, I know this isn't determinative nowadays, but I just checked my panties and there's no penis in there. So this story wasn't about me. It was about
Right.
those of you who have testosterone and dangly bits. But by
Right.
the way, I have confronted people on the train before
Right.
when I knew I had my pepper spray with me."
Right. So it's interesting that you mentioned the gangbanger who had the teardrop and was less afraid than than the I guess the middle class guys, the dentist and the doctors. I guess I don't really know who they might be exactly, um, but it's I feel like when you're on the streets, because I used to run the streets a little bit, and I feel like when you're on the streets, there's a lot more masculinity. It's hyper masculinity, and it goes over the top quite a bit, very regularly. But I feel like it's there, and then once you leave the streets, it tends not to be there so much, and it's just kind of weird to me. I don't really understand it. Like I don't like to. I live in a nice neighborhood, and I was just talking to my wife today. I was telling her about the episode. I was like, from my perspective, it is I don't want to say a responsibility or a duty, but it's just like a thing that men do. They protect women and they stand up for them. And what really bothered me, because I know you said, I know you said it didn't go viral, but I'm looking at it right now and it got like
For me, it
1.1
went
million
pretty
views
viral.
and two and a
Like
half
people who didn't,
thousand
we'll get
comments.
into that. It gets interesting,
Two
but
and a
yeah.
half thousand comments, 160 bookmarks, 427 retweets and quote tweets and whatnot, 561 likes. Like, I mean, that's substantial. I mean, I don't know what that's, like how that compares to some of your other stuff that's went, pretty big, but that's pretty substantial.
It's actually, I would say triple that, because what people did, and
Mhm.
we'll get into why they did this, a lot of people just screen captured it and
Mm,
then posted on it. And that doesn't get reflected in those
right,
numbers
right.
at all. And it's on
So,
Facebook now. Apparently now it's started up on
oh,
Facebook.
wow. So I was telling my wife, and I was, like my big thing, and I mentioned this in the thread to people. I said, look, like it's because some people were asking me, they're like, well, have you ever gotten involved? And the answer to that is actually yes. I actually have gotten involved. Now I'm in Florida, I'm not in Colorado. So clearly I was not able in any way, shape, or form to get involved in this particular incident, or in anyone like it, because I'm literally on the other side of the United States. But I have gotten involved in public and defended people. And I'm a 5.5. I mean, I'm 5 foot 3 and 5 foot 3 1/4, and I weigh 120 pounds. So I'm not exactly a big dude that strikes fear in the hearts of men. Like that's just not happening. I tried and it doesn't work. And when I flex, I usually pull a muscle. So I'm not imposing in any way. And I've stood up to people. But what bothered me was not that so much that people didn't get involved per se. although that's part of it. It was that a lot of people on the internet were like, I'm not getting involved. Like, why would I risk it? And I was like, and they're like, and a lot of them brought up Daniel Perry or Penny. I'm sorry, not Perry, but
Mhm.
Daniel Penny, out of New York, the guy that chokeholded the fellow on the subway, and then now he's on trial. And a lot of them brought him up, and they were complaining, and they were like, well, look what's happening in him. And so I took it as, okay, you're saying you wouldn't get involved. You're ruling it out entirely because the government might get you. Like that is, and that bothered me. It's one thing to say, hey, look, I was in this situation and I judged that at the time, for whatever reason, it wasn't appropriate for me to get involved, right? Like for whatever reason that might be. But it's another thing to say, to rule it out entirely, especially because the government might get you. Because if that's the case, well, then the government has full control over you because they could
And
just do anything illegal and then make an example of somebody else in any other situation. And bam, you're not going to get involved now because, well, I don't want to be like that guy. Right. So it just seems like a really weird situation or not situation, but a really weird response online.
well, what was weirder even about it? So when it went semi-viral, obviously then it went outside my friend circles. My
Mhm.
friend circles knew where I was coming from. I am very openly, don't let the pink hair fool you,
Right.
not a feminist. I believe in that there are innate, of course, some people will fall outside the mold. I
Mhm.
am a more masculine woman than most women. But in general, there are female traits and male traits.
Mhm.
Whatever snowflakes that triggers, I don't care. And I admire male traits in men.
Right.
I do not hate men. I I totally decry the way men have been demonized in society. So my
Right.
friend group understands that. I mean, in fact, 2 years ago, I did a video called I Love Men, where I was just gushing about the fact when I was struggling with a suitcase on a train, this complete stranger came up, a man, and was
Mhm.
bound and determined he was getting that suitcase in the
Right.
overhead. To me, that just encapsulates all the wonderful qualities in men. So when it went outside my friend group, they immediately judged based upon appearance. They saw some chick with pink hair and
Mhm.
immediately
Mhm.
assumed I didn't wear bras, had hairy armpits, and,
Right.
and voted for progressive policies, which just goes to show, listen, having good judgment and maybe taking a look at somebody's timeline first might be a wise idea before you make an ass out of yourself. So that was even funnier because
Right.
immediately the reaction was, she's a feminist. She voted for this. And it's like, A, I'm not a feminist. B, I'm an anarchist. And C, like, when I do vote, it's only for libertarians, and I'd never in a million years vote for this. And I absolutely condemned what happened to
Right.
Daniel Penny. Like,
Well,
that was ridiculous what happened to him.
right. And one of the things I pointed out about Daniel Penny is, and I'll put it up on the screen here. I think I can. I think I have it on hand here that we can just throw it up right away. He's currently on trial at the moment. So he hasn't been convicted
Mhm.
just yet, which I know is not necessarily very comforting to people, but he is still on trial. And let's see, there we go. So, and I'll try to zoom in on it so we can see the text. But there's a picture of him, and a lot of people were posting this very picture in response to you. And so then I just kind of did some digging, and I found an NPR article that had, I think the NPR, I'm not sure if they were quoting somebody else, but he had been interviewed after the fact. And they asked him, they said, well, would you do it again? And the quote from the article was, Penny went on to say that he felt no shame. When asked if he would do it again, he nodded and said, I would, if there was a threat and danger in the present. And so I was like, well, you're bringing up this guy who A, is still on trial. We don't know the outcome of it just yet, for starters. So you're making an assumption on what's happening. I realize it's a disruption nonetheless, but you're bringing up a guy who himself is like, I would do it again because it's the right thing to do. And that's what gets me. I don't quite understand. I don't understand the male mindset these days, because here's the conflict that I'm having. a couple of years ago, we had that stupid Gillette commercial. It was like, best man can't, and like everybody was outraged, right? And so, we were all outraged about this whole woke, that's not masculinity. I'm a proper masculine man. I open doors for ladies, yada, 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 right? So you take that. And then I look at the world today, and I was trying to have an interesting video to open the show with, but I didn't get a chance to. But it was going to include a bunch of like fight scenes with Nine Inch Nails Closer playing in the background, right? And here's my thought, and see if you can go with me. It feels like there are a lot of men out there that want to be considered masculine in some way, whatever and however defined. Not always a good way, but however defined. They want to be, maybe they want to be the Rambo guy. Maybe they want to be, Jean-Claude Van Damme, Rocky, whomever. Maybe they want to be the porn guy who gets the chicks and she enjoys everything and whatever he does and whatever happens in all the pornos. And he just wants to feel like a big stud. So I feel like there's this desire to be this masculine thing, whatever that is. They don't want to do their end of the deal. They don't want to go out and maybe work hard or put themselves in any kind of danger to defend somebody else. It's just like they want everything given to them on the, it's almost like the reward. But and look, let me be very clear, folks. I'm not saying that if you go out and you defend women on the subway, you get an anal tonight. Okay, it's not what I'm saying. What I'm saying is there's a mismatch, and you want to be treated a certain way. You want to be viewed a certain way as a stud, as a hero, as a masculine man. The guy that does the right thing, but then you don't want to actually do the right thing. And so I'm like, I square that away from me, guys. Like, how do you do that? Do you see? Am I making any sense here? Or am I just babbling?
No, you're absolutely making sense. It's almost like now I'll probably won't make sense, but there's an analogy that I love to use where I'm not the one to make it up, who talked about people who love to be in love with sailing, but don't actually sail. They don't want to go through the work to be a sailor, but they love the thought of going out sailing.
Right.
And that's part of it.
More
And
family friendly.
Yeah. And it's also the collectivism where they're like, well, there's a lot of women that hate men. Yeah, there are. And I think that's terrible. And I'm not one of them. So I don't know why you're taking it out on me. The fact is, there's a lot of men that hate women too. And I don't paint all men with that brush, that have been treated very badly by women. Like, I'm not like full like manosphere type thing, but I am very, very sympathetic to men's issues. So me getting attacked was just really, really quite delicious.
It was bizarre. Not that you got attacked, but so much, because it was crazy. Like there were so many. I'm still getting comments now. I had to like put it on mute because I'm like, this is days later and I'm still getting responses from people.
Yeah, and there was that one gentleman, I'm sorry, but I can't remember his name. I'd love to promote his show because he said he did want me on. He's the only guy. He was a black, not conservative commenter, because I think he said he went from Democrat to Republican and now he's independent. Damn, I wish I could remember his name. But he's the only one who was man enough, I will say, to say, I read her timeline. I'm going to take the L on this one.
Oh, yes.
I'm not going to delete the post. Like mad respect to him. And I'm so embarrassed that I don't recall his name right now. But yeah, it did get crazy. And listeners go, oh, you're just shaming men. Okay, I could see how it could be taken that way. And that really wasn't my heart. My heart was to encourage men, that I am not silly enough to think that before the modern era, like, God, there's so many. Obviously, I believe men and women are equal. That doesn't mean they're the same. We're both human beings. We both have human rights, but there are different strengths and weaknesses. And I am not one of those women who is just so stupid to believe that without men, we would not have the world we have today. I'm
Right.
sorry, ladies, men built this world. Now we are helping to continue to build it. But the raw brute strength that it took. Now, there were good women behind these men. It did take
Right.
both, but come on. Right now we depend so much on the government. As a libertarian, I'm saying, I think it's made a lot of women think we don't need men. And
Right.
we do need men, and men need women as well. Women are a
Right.
civilizing influence on men. Men build the society, women help civilize the men.
Right.
It's a give and take situation, but it's just so the intensity of the attacks are so crazy that I just stopped denying it, because I started to remember, when you get that defensive, they say that the dog that barks the loudest is the one that got hit with the stone, that
Mm.
maybe they're feeling a little bit of shame there. As women in their more natural roles as nurturers should be shamed at times when they're called to that role and they're
Right.
not. Like, what kind of horrible woman would I be if my husband, who's taken care of me so well, got sick and then I left him and
Right.
like wasn't willing to care for him? I mean, that is kind of a betrayal. Well, not just of the marriage vows, but of my nature as a woman. Even though I'm not the most feminine woman, I see a baby crying, I want to go help that baby. And to
Right.
me, to see some young lady getting abused on the train and the men not having the instincts to at least say, cool it, man. People were acting like I was saying you needed to go murder that guy.
Right.
How did we get from zero to kill him? All I was saying is somebody could have been like, dude, can you maybe just go down a few rows? Can you just chill it? Or maybe ask the lady, hey, do you want to come sit over here?
Right.
Something. I'm not saying you had to physically assault this guy. No one wanted to see that either. But no one even said anything. And some
Right.
people go, well, you didn't either. And that's true, because I was in such shock that none of the men did. But I have before. And if I had my pepper spray, I would have. No
So
one
let me
could
address
accuse
that.
me. Let me just finish one
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
second. What gets me about this is no one can accuse me of being a coward. I might not be a I might not be like the one you're going to call on if it's time to like throw hands. But I think I've proven myself in the past 2 years
Right.
that I will give up things to do what's right. How
Right.
easy would it have been for me the past couple of years to say, I don't know these people. I worked
Right.
hard for what I got. I'm going to risk it. And I did lose it for a while.
Right.
And to hear, well, I've got a wife and family to come home to. I get it. But you want to know what? The cops that just shoot people, that's what they say too. I just
Right.
wanted to get home. I wanted to get home to my wife and family. And I said on my Twitter feed, and I told Wayne when I got home, Wayne's my husband, and he was proud of me for saying it. I said, if I ever heard that you were sitting on a train and that happened and you did nothing, I would be ashamed of you.
Right. Yeah. So 2 points. First, let me back up a little bit because I'm going to address this whole, I've got a wife and a family, because I got a wife and a family. I got a wife and a son. Okay. So we'll address that in just a moment. Going back to, I think a lot of people saw, oh, pink hair. Well, she must be a feminist, crazy liberal, probably went to Berkeley, studied feminism, hates men. Andrea Dworkin got, Andrea Dworkin posters on her wall, whatever. Okay. So what? It's still a person. I don't mean to say it that way, but that is still a person. And at the end of the day, like this whole you voted for it, which is the assumption that they made based on your pink hair. So what? Well, first of all, nobody voted to get punched in the face. Nobody voted to be harassed. They might have voted in a way that resulted in those kind of things happening, and that was not that like in most cases, I would say, like almost every single case, it would probably be argued very well that was not the intention of why they voted whatever policy that they did that led to these kind of things. And so to me, it's just you're basically washing your hands and in a way that kind of absolves you from doing the right thing. You're just like, oh well, you voted for it. Nobody voted to get harassed on a bus. or on a subway. Nobody voted like in New York where you see all these women getting punched in the face. Nobody's voting for that. That's crazy talk. And so the idea like that they would vote for something and then we would just be like, well, too bad. I guess you just have to deal with it. Like that seems very shitty to me. And I just can't imagine being a man and saying, like, I would do the right thing except for the way that you voted. Like,
Yeah,
what?
it's
Is that
it's
your
weird.
morality? Your morality is based on how somebody else voted? Are you fucking insane? Like, that's
You
just
said the F
crazy
bomb
to me.
before me.
I know,
I'm
right?
free,
I'm I'm
free at
I'm
last.
I've been I've been drinking, I said. So,
But
and
here's
then
what's funnier,
yeah,
DL. Here's what's funnier, okay? I'm not claiming to be a trad rife by any stretch of the imagination. But as modern relationships go, I have a very traditional marriage. I'm a Christian, as you know, and
mhm,
something my pastor once said stuck with me in talking about a marriage. A thing with two heads is a freak. My husband is the head of my household.
mhm,
I say that without shame. People who make fun of me because of my pink hair, guess what? I asked my husband for permission for that because he has to look at it every day. Now I
right,
kind of do with the video things, but normally I don't have to look at myself. He loves it. So you got all these strange men who
right.
think it's their job to critique the appearance of another man's wife. Well,
Right.
guess what, honey baby? Fuck you. My husband likes it.
Caryn Ann Unchained. We'll
You
drop the
freed
first
me.
F-bomb.
You freed
Now we're
me.
Unchained. So, no, I agree. And honestly, I think here's what I believe, and I can't prove it, but just it's a hunch. I think that there are a lot of people in the libertarian community who, in their personal lives, live them a little bit more conservatively than their politics might lead people to believe. Because there's a lot of things that I would support, like in terms of legality, that I wouldn't engage in myself. Like I support sex work. I'm not calling up sex workers. So like that's just not part of who I am. And you know, I think there's you're saying like you're more of a trad wife type or somewhere along that line. I think there's a lot of people in the libertarian community that are like that. Just from talking to people and just kind of seeing how they live. I think there's a lot of people that are a little bit more on the conservative side, but when it comes to the politics, they're like, hey, it's not the government's job to be involved. So, and then of course they might have their pink hair, or I don't have anything that suggests that I might be liberal. I don't.
You just got tattoos all over the place,
I
and
do
you
have
know
I
it.
do have a couple, but they're not even all that impressive. But so now let me go back to this issue of okay, well, I've got a wife and a family. I've got a wife and a kid, and a lot of people said those kind of things. Me too. And guess what, guys? My wife and my kid are sometimes out and about without me. And I would supremely be forever grateful if my wife and my child were in any kind of danger, even the most remote danger, and another man stepped in to ensure their safety. I would be supremely grateful because I can't always be there. Now, here's the thing. I can't ask of other men if I'm not willing to do it because that, in my opinion, that's immoral and or at least kind of hypocritical. Asking somebody else to defend your family and put themselves at potential risk when I wouldn't do it maybe for theirs. And I mean without necessarily knowing them. And so for me, what goes around comes around. And if you're unwilling as a man to step in and necessarily say, hey guys, knock it off, or excuse me, man, would you like my seat over here? Or whatever. Right. And like you said, that doesn't mean you have to go in guns blazing and start a fist fight and, karate chop his head, or whatever. Like nobody's saying all that. We're just saying like, maybe speak up. And the one thing that I learned, because I used to run the streets a bit when I was a teenager, not anywhere, not now. I'm pretty clean
You're
cut now.
you're a
I'm
gangbanger
boring
now.
now.
We know it.
I'm boring now, right? But one of the things I know, and I'll tell you a funny story. So, and this is actually not me running the streets. This is when I was about like 15. I went to Meadowdale High School in Dayton, Ohio. It was a public school. It was a bit of a gritty school. So it wasn't a super inner city school, but it was a gritty school. Like in the 90s, we had we had metal detectors. Let's put it that way. I had to go through metal detectors every single day to go into school. And before I start, so I sixth, seventh, and eighth grade, I went to a Catholic private school. And then for whatever reason, I went on to ninth grade, which was going to be Meadowdale. It was a public school in Dayton, Ohio. And the neighbor girl who was a year ahead of me, she said, Daniel, because I didn't go by DL back then. She said, Daniel, when you get here, you need to be careful because fights here aren't like fights that you're used to. They end up with puddles of blood and the ambulance being called. And she was not joking whatsoever. So for whatever reason, one day there was an altercation that kind of got brewed up between me and another guy, and his friends kind of just fanned the flames. Now I couldn't run out. I couldn't run away. Okay. Cause like that would have looked bad and that would have caused other problems. So I basically stood up to him. So we were like, we're going to meet at lunch. Well, he didn't really want to fight me. So I went down, we stood toe to toe. And and it was more like this, I'm looking like this at the guy, cause he was like much taller than me, like pretty much everybody ever. And we were standing there and I was just sure I was going to get the shit beat out of me.
You're like, I'm dying.
Okay. But I couldn't back down. Right. Because if I had backed down, that would have caused me other problems. We don't have to get into all that. Just the way things work when you're out in the real world, in the nitty gritty part of the world, at least. So after a few moments of standing there, staring him down, and he's like, dude, swing. And I was like, okay, look, I'm not the one that started this. I'm like, you wanted this. So here we are. I showed up. You do what you got to do. Right. This is what I didn't say it like all middle class like that. I don't remember exactly how I said it. And he never swung and I never swung. We never got in a fight. And here's what ended up happening. His friends started throwing French fries at him. All it took for me to get out of that was standing up to him. That was it. And I've seen that happen. I've experienced that happen so many times. Standing up to people in so many situations that's enough. That is all it takes. Now, there are situations where standing up does end up in an altercation. But I think people need to realize that that in many cases, just standing up or just being a voice is enough. And I would hope that if my wife and my son were out there and there was even the slightest threat there, that some man would have the bravery to just make his voice known and say, hey, somebody, like, I think people on the internet fail to realize that. Maybe they've never been in a fight before. I don't really know. Maybe they need to go out and have a couple fights or something like that so that they can understand exactly how this works. But it doesn't always end up, you chokeholding the guy like Daniel Penny did and going to jail or potentially going to jail. Like sometimes you just stand up to somebody and be like, hey, knock it off. And they go, okay, whatever. And they go away. So that's my fun little story there. I've got bazillion other stories you guys don't really want to hear. So, but I think that was, and I told my wife that, like before the show just now, I told her, I was like, look, I would hope that if somebody was, if you were out and there was a man there and you were being threatened, that he would step in for you, because I believe what goes around comes around. And, like if you don't stand up for other people, then that's kind of what you can expect. Other people not to stand up for you or your loved ones. And that's important to me. So.
And something that's libertarians, which you and I both are, which a lot of people don't realize that were retweeting me, didn't know, is, obviously, well, maybe not you. I'm going to get into my little anarchist self here. I know you're not going to agree with everything I've said.
You're good.
Yeah. But obviously from monarchy and feudalism, democracy was a step forward. Not a big fan of it today, but it was certainly a step forward. And the men that brought that about, when they signed the Declaration of Independence, they all had wives and families too.
Right.
And there was no guarantee they were going to win that war. And in fact, it looked like they would not. It looked like they were signing their death warrants.
Right.
Every big progress that happens in this country is because of bravery. It's not always brave men, but it's usually brave men. And as a Christian, I do believe there's a reason in the Bible if those of you who aren't believers, just deal with it. Where there was a battle, and the men would not go into battle unless this brave woman would lead them. And she said to them, "Today the Lord will conquer your enemies, but it will be to your shame, because he will deliver them into the hands of a woman." And I do think there is a reason for that, that there is a primal role there. And that's what I was talking about. I wasn't here to shame men. I
Right.
wasn't
No, I
here to
am.
criticize men. I was here to love the male instinct that I think is disappearing. And I blame the government for a lot of that, because
Right.
the government's now become our daddy and our mommy.
Right.
And we're not learning how to be a community. I do believe that each of us is our brother's keeper. Is there an enforceable obligation to that? No, but there should be a moral intuition for that.
Right. So I'm glad you brought up the anarchy, because I screenshotted some of the responses to you so that we could chit chat about them. So let me
Uh-oh.
put this one up on the screen, because I thought this was interesting. So folks, I am not an anarchist. You might say that I'm an anarchist, like I have anarchist sympathies. I'm a minarchist, but I'm not one that, and just for anybody that's watching that may not know the difference, just very simply, anarchist is like, hey, no government, it's not legitimate. Minarchists are like, okay, well, maybe a little bit of government, and it varies depending on how much. And many of the minarchists will say, well, we need a government because we need at least these basic things. I take a slightly different approach. I look at it and I say, well, I think that a government is inevitable, because I don't believe that the majority of humanity is compatible with true anarchy. So I
Now I'm
believe
going to
that we will
argue with
always.
you.
Right. So I take a little bit of different approach. So that's where we are.
Government is
Oh,
inevitable. Government is inevitable, but we're talking about voluntary government. The state is not inevitable.
fair
But I'm
enough.
going to make fun of you now. Minarchy, let me put it to y'all out there just more simply, it's just the tip.
It is. It is. And I accept it, but I will say this. I am I'm as close to a virgin as possible, so I try to take literally just the tip, where maybe some other anarchists take a little more. Okay, but let's put this up on the screen. All right, so here it is, and I've tried to zoom in as much as we can. So it says, and these are all public, so that's why I'm putting the
Yeah.
names of it. Well, look at what they did to the last guy to step in. They're talking about Daniel Penny. Besides, as an anarchist, you should have no expectation of chivalry. So answer that, because I I'm not an anarchist, and I'm like, that was
Yeah.
absurd. So how would you answer that as an anarchist?
Well, I mean, it would have been accurate if he said you should expect no laws enforcing chivalry. But
Right.
in fact, as an anarchist, the only reason I believe anarchy could work is because I do believe in the inherent goodness and morality of people. I think sociopaths are rare, but it takes the good people to corral and neutralize it. So, in fact, as an anarchist, I have the highest expectation of chivalry. In a world where you're really, really self responsible, I think that the inherent roles of men and women will become actually more obvious. And as a woman, I have the highest expectation of chivalry as an anarchist. I don't think anarchy could work without it.
Right. And just, kind of complimenting that, I think it's an absurd idea to say that there's any philosophy out there, and maybe there is one, I don't know them all, that you can't have some expectation of your, your fellow man and woman around you. Like, if there's no expectation of chivalry, then there's no expectation that somebody won't murder me either. Like, there's no expectation of anything. And so I feel like when they say, as an anarchist, I think what they're really saying is like, as an anarchist, defined as the Joker in Batman,
Yeah.
who's a lunatic and seems to have no rules that he follows whatsoever, which technically we could argue about that. But I think that's how people see anarchy when they talk about it in that way. They're like, oh, well, you must not believe in any kind of rules, social mores, nothing. And I'm like, well, I mean, even I don't go that far. Geez.
And the fact is, and you've heard this a lot of times, but to more normies, I guess, they don't realize this. We live most of our life in anarchy. The fact is, when you engage in social mores of, when you see two people going down a grocery aisle and one of you just moves aside for the other, was there a
Right.
law telling you to do that? No, it was just basic human decency. And a lot of times it's on an invisible social pecking order you might not even know. If you're like a young person and it's a little old lady, you're probably going to move aside for the little old lady. And
Right.
it's not something that's enforced by anybody. We
Right.
live most of our lives in chivalrous anarchy. But chivalry goes both ways. I don't know what it's called on the women's side, but also women shouldn't be like, walking with their man and then seeing a bunch of thugs ahead and have her start mouthing off to him so that it's getting him in some kind of trouble that he
Right.
wasn't looking for. I don't know what maybe that's just called not being a bitch. I don't know.
Right.
Sorry,
Right.
here we go again with my mouth. But, there's expectations on both sides.
Right. Well, like for instance, now my wife has really good company that she keeps, so this would not happen. But just as an example, if she knew a woman that were bad mouthing me, I'm pretty certain, I'm very positive that she would chime in and be like, "Whoa, whoa, whoa, you're talking about my husband here," and she would get all, I'm drawing a blank on the man's name, she would get all
Yeah.
Christopher Walken, and she would be like, "Whoa, whoa, whoa, talking about my
Yeah.
man all wrong," right? And and so she would jump in to defend me. Now, would she jump in to defend me if some dudes were beating on me? I mean, she might. I don't know. I assume she probably would. I don't know. But I think you're right. It does go both ways, even if it doesn't necessarily look the same,
Right.
right? It might look different. So I'll give you a great example of that because you were talking about like, hey, not mouthing off. So um, my wife and my ex-wife find it trashy for how some people talk out in public, when they're with their significant other. And so, like, my and I say that just to kind of balance it out. But there was a story about my ex-wife and I. We were walking to the store, and there was a car going by, and some woman said something like really foul, and my wife responded immediately back to her, right? And then she couldn't believe that the woman was so trashy in the way that she spoke because the woman was in the car and there was a man in the driver's seat, so presumably they were a couple. And so there was this certain sense of like, when I'm out, I act respectable so that my man feels like he's got a respectable woman. Now, I certainly do the same thing, but I think socially, I think there's a little, whether we like to admit it or not, many people won't, but I think there's a little bit of leniency given to a man that isn't necessarily given to a woman. So if we're out and about and I start cussing somebody out, people will be like, they may not think of it as appropriate, but it'll be a little different than if my wife were necessarily cussing somebody out. It would feel the vibe would be different for people. And I think because of that, there are, I think there's a reasonable expectation for some people. I mean, it depends on couple, right? That, hey, don't embarrass me, you
Yeah.
know, don't start a fight that I'm going to get beat up in, these kind of things, right? Maybe the woman isn't necessarily defending physically, but maybe she's doing other things to play in that role, I guess is what I'm saying.
And
So,
people's ideas of equality are just so odd to me, you know? Um, it's almost like where these guys are like, well, you're equal now, so you shouldn't expect anything. Okay, if I popped out a baby, can I say we're equal now? So you better pop out your boobie and feed it.
right,
No, there's different
right.
functions. The equality is in rights, but everyone's functions in society are a little bit different. That's not what equality means. It's such a perversion of it.
Right. And to that point, because I saw there was a couple of comments that were like, hey, you're equal, like this is what you wanted, right? And that's weird to me because let me go back to my size. I'm 5'3", I weigh 120 pounds. So I'm a scrawny little fella. I can overpower most women that I know. Now, I'm not saying that I would. I'm just saying physically, I can, even at this size, I can physically overpower most women that I know. There's a few, and I've got one really good friend where she's actually smaller than me, and I would actually be afraid to cross her. But for most women that I know, I could physically overpower them. There's a reason for that, because men and women are different. Men are generally stronger. And so the idea, like, oh, well, you're equal now. So then you don't believe. So, like, it almost feels like they're using it as an excuse, or maybe they really believe it, but they don't want to own up to it. Right. Because I don't believe it. I don't like, if my wife isn't really bigger than me per se, she's like a half an inch taller than me or something like that. Um, but I would never be like, well, you have equal rights. You open up, you have equality now. You open up the pickle jar. You lift this heavy thing. You do it. No, I would go and do it. And so if I would do it for my wife, why wouldn't I do it for somebody else? Right? Why wouldn't I see it that same way with
Yeah.
somebody else? Right? It's still there, even if they have pink hair. And I think that who's that one? Do I have that? I don't think I have that one.
Oh,
No,
there
I
was
do
just
have it.
some crazy ones. I just love when they post that dumbass
Oh,
meme of
yes.
the
Yes, I
frog.
do have it. I do have it.
Of the
It was
frog saying, "Oh, well, it's toxic." I go, well, then you better be scared of me. But I always, whenever I see that stupid ass meme that in nature, brightly colors are they're worn against
right,
toxic things, I'm like, explain parrots then.
right.
I mean, like, it's just dumb.
Yep.
Uh,
This one right here. So this one I saw.
yeah.
Imagine trying to chivalry shame. Okay, I didn't even know this was a phrase. Really? Chiv I do that all the time. Dude, why didn't
I
you go
didn't
help
even
that
see
woman?
this one.
I did. I saw way more than I should have. And you're lucky I didn't
And I
screen
wasn't in
capture
New
it.
York City, I was in Denver.
Right. Imagine trying to chivalry shame men in New York City with bright pink hair, left-leaning policies. Again, we're speaking out of our a-hole, and then a body count of over 109. I don't even know why you picked 109, but okay.
Yeah,
And
that's oddly specific.
so, okay, let's assume that all of these are true. Okay, and we don't need to discuss whether they're true, what the numbers are. No, no, no. Let's just assume for a moment. Okay, well, bright pink hair is true, so we got that one. Left-leaning policies is not true, but let's assume it is. And let's assume that you've just slept with every man that you could find until you finally married one, and he didn't care about your 108 body count. Okay, so what?
But
Are
let's get
you
something.
not? Do we
I
not
do
look
want to
at?
get some, but I do want to get something straight here. I've always been in long-term relationships. I'm not going to give a body count here, but before my present husband, I was married for over 20 years. And
Okay,
I've been faithful to this husband and faithful to my prior husband.
right.
Like, this is just so completely opposite of reality. It's just not even funny.
Right, right. But even if it were, and this is my point, even if it were, let's say okay, he got it right on the pink hair. That one's kind of a given.
Yeah, yeah, that one's right. The bright pink
But
hair,
let's say you've
good,
got
good.
left-leaning policies, and let's say that you just a
The
horrible
biggest
woman.
hoe on the
Slept,
planet.
you slept around so much that even gonorrhea doesn't want you. Okay,
Yeah.
let's just say it's just crazy. So what? You're still a human being, and is this not a man? Do you not still believe that a pink-haired, hoe-ass woman who believes in leftist ideology, you still think it's okay to beat her up because she's slept around? Like, what kind of man are you saying about yourself? Because I would never want to say this. And I would be embarrassed if my son, he's 5 right now, so it doesn't matter. But let's say in 20 years, he's a, I hear in 20 years, I'm 45. So in 20 years, I'm gonna be 65. Okay. And he's gonna be 25. So in 20 years, let's just say that he came home and I heard that he didn't defend a woman because he's like, well, she had pink hair, so she probably had left-leaning policies and she's probably fucked all my friends. So that's why I didn't defend her, Dad. I'm gonna backhand him. I'm totally gonna backhand him on the spot. And I might
But
lose in a
here's
tussle
what's
with
even
you
funnier. I'm reading
because, like,
this thing
dude,
and I'm
that
like,
is not how men act.
imagine trying to make such broad sweeping judgments about someone merely from a profile pic.
Right,
Like, and my profile is public. It would have only took, because I've done this before. I've stuck
right.
my foot in my mouth before. I'm not going to name names, but there was someone when I was all full of myself one day in the Libertarian Party, and I thought I was doing so much. And this was a long time ago. And I like shut my mouth off at this other girl. And like then I went and looked at her profile and I'm like, oh my God, she does like 100 times more crap than me. And I
Mhm.
learned my lesson that day. Just take a second and look at their profile before you make a complete ass out of yourselves,
Right,
which is what these men did. So these are
right.
supposed to be the upstanding examples of manhood who couldn't even look for a second at my profile pic. He might have still thought the body count thing for whatever reason sounds personal to me and oddly specific, like he's got some trauma in his background. But one thing that's pretty obvious from my timeline is that I don't have left leaning policies.
Right. Well, not only that, let's just put it out straight. The idea that we're like, unless a woman is a porn star, right? And and you have a good
Yeah.
working knowledge that
So
she's probably slept around.
you got the video catalog.
Right. So, unless she's actually a porn star, and I'll address that in just a moment. But unless she's a porn star, the idea that somebody would say, "Well, your body count is so high," that is the man version of, "Oh, you must have a small pee-pee."
Yeah.
Like, that's literally what it is. That's just like, and I don't like, for me, if somebody were to say you have a small pee-pee, I would be like, I mean, I guess, I don't know. I don't really spend a lot of time comparing it. I'm happily married. I've got a 5-year-old son. So whatever, like, I don't really care. But and I do find it inappropriate to say that, and it's totally a cop out. It's just somebody trying to insult you and be mean to you, right? That's all that it is. It's not even an argument. But if men don't like that being said about men, then maybe they shouldn't leap to, well, you got a body count of this much, unless you know for sure. Now, let's address that. Let's say that you know for
Here's what's
sure.
funny. Wayne is so culturally like he's not in it. I'm going to have to explain to him
Mhm.
after the show what body count means. I remember the first time I explained to him what butt hurt meant.
Right,
That was just such a and popo. That was just such a wonderful conversation. But now I'm going to have to explain to him what a
right.
body count is. He's going to be like, "Do they think you killed people?"
Right, right. That's what it used to mean, right? Like body count. You remember the band Body Count with Ice-T? It didn't mean like, hey, I slept with a lot of women, because like he was a rapper, so that was kind of a given, or at least an assumption, right? It was meant like, hey, I've killed a lot of people. Like that was what body count used to mean. But even still, even if a woman, like, let's say it's a porn star, right? And you know that she's slept around a lot because that's literally her job, to sleep with people. So what? That doesn't take away from the humanity of somebody that doesn't deserve to be assaulted. And so I don't understand where a man would say, I'm a man and I'm going to insult a woman and say that she doesn't deserve to be defended because she slept around. Right. Now, if you want to make an argument that's somewhat relevant to that, then fine. We can, that's a different argument. If you want to say, hey, like, she's a broken woman because she slept around. Okay, fine. That's entirely different argument. But there's no correlation whatsoever to
and
body count and whether or
And
not
what's
you should
funnier, DL,
have
is that
self-defense or
I think
defense.
some people lost the context that the woman in question that was being verbally abused wasn't even me. It
Right,
was this younger lady. I would guess she was about 28. She looked to me like a harried house mom, like somebody
right,
that probably had a 4 or 5-year-old at home. She was in some sweatpants. She wasn't dressed provocatively,
right,
just your average like neighbor that you would see running around with some toddlers in the street. Had her hair up in the bun like she was just trying to get somewhere. So it
right,
wasn't even me that was complaining about not being defended. It was this 20 something that just looked like a young mom to me.
right. And that makes it worse, right? Because think about it. a lot of guys went on there and said, "Oh, you voted for this, but you weren't even talking about you." And it was very clear from the story because you mentioned it in the story. So now they're basically saying, I don't generally like to do this, but I'll do it just for the time being. Um, Imagine you were on the subway and it was my wife who was a total like, you look at my wife, you don't think anything liberal whatsoever. You just think another random woman. And I don't mean that negatively about her. I'm
Yeah.
just saying like there's nothing that jumps out about her attire and her dress. She dresses, very nice. She's got the standard black hair for an Asian woman, standard woman look, right? Nothing out of the ordinary whatsoever. And so it was like you were getting online saying, look, there's other woman who might have been a plain Jane, was being harassed, and none of y'all fuckers jumped up to say anything. And they're like, well, because the pink haired lady complained about it, I guess I won't fucking do anything about it. Like that makes it even worse because now you're punishing somebody else who you don't even know anything about based on somebody that you're assuming everything about. You're assuming their policies, how they vote. You're assuming how many men they slept with, as if that has anything to do with whether or not somebody should be accosted on a subway. Like this is just crazy. And I don't understand it. But again, going back to my original point, the biggest thing that bothers me about it is that a lot of men were like, I wouldn't do it because look at what happened to this guy over here. And they're using Daniel Penny and they're saying, the government might get me. And I'm like, great. So you probably believe that government is tyrannical, needs to slow down their tyranny in some way, but you're not even willing to defend a woman because the government might slap you on the hand because they might make life uncomfortable. So what are you going to do when the government really does something serious? You ain't going to do shit. You aren't going to do anything. And here's what I told my wife. In my opinion, and I'm making it a big assumption here. In my opinion, any man that says I wouldn't defend somebody else because it's the right thing to do, because I'm worried about my wife and my child and whether or not I can be there, I'm going to go out and say, I will be on record and I will say it. You probably wouldn't defend your wife either. Because if you're not going to do the right thing in one moment, there's no guarantee you'll do it in another. And so men out there, if you're watching and you're like, well, I wouldn't do it because I'm afraid I might go to jail or I'm afraid of this reason or that reason, then you know what? That fear may strike you the same way when it really counts and it matters when it comes to your family. You might also be afraid I'll go to jail. I'll go to federal pound me in the ass prison. And I don't want to do that. So I'll just let some guy accost my wife verbally. Like, because people tend to behave the same way in situations. They don't all of a sudden become a hero because it's their wife. They're either the upstanding man or they're not. So that's what I got to say about that.
And I agree with you, and you could probably appreciate this. It's really tough on Wayne because Wayne would agree with everything you just said. And you see, Wayne's not on Twitter. It's probably a
Good
good
for
thing that
him.
he's not on Twitter because all these brave men saying all these things about me, do you think any of them would say it to my husband's face?
Right.
No, because they're a bunch of fucking cowards.
Right. Absolutely.
And
And
it's a good thing he's not on Twitter because he probably
right.
he probably would have taken care of some business by now.
No,
And you
he'd
got
been
to
busy typing
understand,
forever.
yeah, what he's it takes a very, very strong man to be in a relationship with me because I'm a very public figure.
Mhm.
I get a lot of crap thrown at me, and I have to say to Wayne, please don't fight that battle for me.
Right.
Don't fight that battle for me because it's his instinct. And I love that instinct that he has. But when people elected me to a position, they didn't elect a couple. So I'm sure you can understand how very, very difficult it is sometimes for Wayne when he
Right.
sees some of the stuff that comes at me and I'm like, let me handle it.
Right. No, absolutely. Because yeah, I guess I don't have anything to add to that.
Yeah.
I'm kind of fired up about this whole topic because it just kind of burns me that I feel like we're getting, uh, men are becoming more and more wimpy. And there is a fair argument. Like some people, like I'll address two arguments actually. Number one, people, there was I don't have the screenshots, but a couple people were like, well, hey, when have you ever stepped in, like directing it directly at me? And I actually have. Now, I haven't in recent years because I just haven't seen any situations. So there wasn't any for me to get involved in. But I have in the past, even at my own risk. Some were with, friends and family, which, a lot of people think it's a lot easier. And then some with people that I didn't even know. Like I've stepped in and said, hey, hey, hey. And again, hey, 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 looking like this. Hey, 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 you knock it off. You whatever, blah, blah, blah. I'm stepping up to people because a lot of times, again, it just takes somebody to step up to them. And then most people will back down. And so, yes, I have. Yes, I would. I grew up. So my mom was ferocious. Okay. She would make grown men cry. She was tough. And she wasn't much bigger than me, but she was just a tough woman. Like when I went to basic training, she said, you'll be fine. There's no way they're yelling at you more than I ever have. Right. Like she was just sure that whatever they were going to do was nothing compared to what she had already delivered. Like she was a tough woman. She was a very tough cookie. And, but when she would go out, we lived up in the north. So it would get dark, when it would get dark at like 8 o'clock or 7 o'clock, she'd want to go to the store. And my dad would be like, go to the store with your mom, make sure nothing happens to her. Right. And then she would always be like, make sure, nothing happens to your sister, walk home with your sister, make sure you protect her, blah, blah. And I protected my sister even in the midst of like 10 or 15 guys circling with me. Long story short, I was picking her up at a middle school, public school in Dayton, Ohio. And we ended up getting into an altercation because I had a friend that ran his mouth and he went with me. And we ended up being circled by a whole bunch of people. We ended up getting chased home by like 15 people. Right. But like I was willing to stand up. So yes, I have. And I would continue to do that today because I was raised that way. That's what you do. You protect women, period. End of story. Even if you're a scrawny 5'3", 120-pound dude that would love to gain some weight but can't. Okay. You do it. End of story. So there's that issue. What was the other issue? Damn it. I forgot what the other one was.
So you need the little notepad like I do, because otherwise I'm like, notes.
Like this last few days, I was like, oh, I should say this. I should say this. I should talk about this. And I knew I should have taken notes, but then I didn't. And so here I am, half blitzed, rambling along. And now I can't remember some of the good things that I wanted to say, which were really, really good.
But getting you to cuss was like getting Tom Woods to cut. I got Tom Woods to cuss. So now I've got 2 notches on my belt.
Snap. Look at you. But again, like, the issue is at the end of the day, I believe that men protect women. End of story, period. And I'll be teaching my son that you protect women. And yes, you put yourself at risk, and the women around you, they should expect that. Now, the other thing that I will address is it doesn't mean that you run into every single potential altercation. Sometimes it's not the right time. And there's many reasons for it. Maybe I'm on a subway and I see a woman, being accosted by a dude, and she reaches up and pops him upside the head. Okay. Maybe I don't have to worry about that one. Right. Like that's an easy one. Like there are some women out there that are pretty tough like that. Or maybe she gets up and she moves to a different seat and ends that. Okay. Don't have to get involved there. Right. Or maybe if the mob existed, I'm just making a scenario here. I'm not saying that there is actually a mob, but let's just say that there was a mob and the mob was there and they were doing some things. Maybe that's the time you don't get involved either. Because again, if the mob existed, if they were a real thing, they might come after you and your family and everybody that you know. Right. Or maybe more simply, there's just a bunch of dudes and maybe you're not in a position to do much. So maybe you just dial 911, right? Whatever the case. But the fact of the matter was so many people got online and then just chastised you. And they just were like, I'm not getting involved. They ruled it out completely. And the fact that they ruled it out because of government just really weighed on me, because I was like, that's all it's going to take to stop you from being a moral person is the government to say that it's illegal or that you might get in trouble. You might go to jail. That's it. Well, shit, they won. The government has won. They've beaten you. If that's all that it takes, and I love this quote. Somebody, let me put it up on the screen here in just a second here.
I saw your little starred thing.
Yeah. I like this one from Keith Garrett. He said, all evil needs to prosper is for good men to do nothing. That's true. Do nothing and evil will win. That's all that it needs. And in many cases, all that it needs to prevail, all that good needs it to prevail is simply men to stand up and say, no, unacceptable, not happening.
Yep.
And sometimes other men will do it. Sometimes you can be the one to inspire. So maybe I'm on the subway, I'm a scrawny little guy, and I say, hey, you crackhead, you bum. I know you don't say bum, you say everything else, but you won't say bum. I say, you crackhead ass bum.
You're
Knock
like,
it
oh,
off.
you'll say every insult of the word, but you draw the line of bum.
Right. We have our limits here, right? So I'm like, you leave that homely girl alone, right? And then maybe some other dude who's a little bit bigger than me, because that would be most of them, he stands up and says, yeah, you knock it off, right? Like that's how our world gets better. Our world gets better by one person doing the right thing and hopefully inspiring and usually inspiring other people to do the right thing. And to me, this is what it's all about. It's all about doing the right thing and saying, look, I would be willing to, it's situational. And maybe the situation calls for me to stand up and maybe it doesn't. I don't know, but I'm not ruling it out. And I'm sure as hell not ruling it out because government. And I'll make one more jab about men. Because all these out of 2,000 plus replies to you, I assume that most of those men were of age. They were over the age of 18. Hold my microphone. Let me get situated for this one.
So you're getting squared up. You're like, okay, it's go time.
Yeah. All of y'all some bitches because that one 17-year-old kid up in, where was it, Minnesota? Was it Minnesota? No.
Talking about Kyle Rittenhouse?
Kyle Rittenhouse. Kyle Rittenhouse, 17 years old, went into riots to give first aid to people, carried an AR-15, but he went into riots. 17. He went into riots and ended up defending himself three times. He shot 3 people, killed 2 of them. He defended himself 3 times. Not only did he defend himself, he did it wisely. Now, don't get me wrong, folks. I personally, if it had been my son, I'd have been like, you stay the hell out of there. That's not 17-year-old. But he did go there. He defended himself. He did it wisely. He did it better than people my age that I would expect. He had very good trigger control. But he's 17. 17. And he went out into danger to help people. We got grown-ass men on a subway who can't say, you knock it off, stop it. Or, excuse me, ma'am, would you like my seat? Grown-ass men can't do that much. You got most of you guys that have ruled it out completely. You've been put to shame by a kid who's not even of age. Fuck all you. That's what I got.
And the one thing I'd like to close on, and again, you know how terrible I am with names, and we're friends on Facebook, but I'm no longer on Facebook. But most people of a certain vintage, maybe you younger people won't remember it, and maybe you can Google it in the meantime. But during like the racial tensions, I think it was in the 60s, there was this young Black woman, and there was a group of Nazis just marching through her town, and they got one of them on the ground. The mob got one of these neo-Nazis on the ground, and these Black people were beating the crap out of them. And I understand why they were angry. And this teenage Black girl threw her body on top of them.
Yeah, I'm trying to see if I can find the picture. I've seen it. I just saw it for the first time.
I think her name was Kenosha. Crap. But it is such a powerful picture, and I'm trying to find it right now too.
Oh, I can't. I don't know the woman's name. I only saw it I literally saw it a month ago. It wasn't very long ago.
Yeah, it's right here. It's on BBC. The teenager who saved a man with an SS tattoo. I'm going to stick this in chat, and I want to look up her name. Kishia. We are friends on Facebook. What a powerful picture. Let me put this up here. And when I saw this when I was very young, oh, I have to connect to YouTube. Let me connect YouTube to do chat. Let's see if it'll work. Connect, continue, allow. How many screens do I need to go through here?
I don't know, but I'm about to put it up on the screen.
Oh, here we go. Okay, and I'll stick the chat and screen here. And this had a profound impact on me as a younger person. It says it failed to post to Liberty Dad, but I'm sure you'll get it. Yep, there she is.
This woman right here. I saw this. I don't know the story, but only what you have said here. I saw the picture like, I don't know, a week or two ago, and it was like really amazing to me. Like, here's this woman. This guy's clearly a Nazi, and she's protecting him from a violent crowd at her own risk. This is what makes our country great. This is what makes humanity great. People standing up for other people, regardless of who they are. Maybe they have pink hair, maybe they're Nazis, whatever the case may be. And I think what goes around comes around. I'll defend people first and foremost because it's the right thing to do. Second of all, after that, I'm going to defend people because I want people to defend me and those that I care about. And I feel like the way that we do this is to make it part of our society. So I know that Caryn Ann won't shame men. I will. And I'll say you should be ashamed of yourselves. If you're a man that said, I absolutely under no circumstances would do that if I don't know the person, you should be ashamed of yourself. Now, if you said, hey, I don't know, I would like to, but I don't know how I would react in the moment. Or if you'd say, hey, it's situational or something along that line, fine, that's fair. You haven't ruled it out. But that's what makes our society better. That's how we get away from these bad policies.
There's a great quote in the article I found the picture on where the photographer who took that picture said, she put herself at physical risk to protect someone who, in my opinion, would not have done the same for her. Who does that in the world? We all need to do that in the world.
Right. Absolutely. All right, Caryn Ann. Well, I think on
that heavy note,
we've said everything that needs to be said. I'll put you back screen real quick and let me go ahead and close out. And then I'll chit chat with you in just a second.
Okay, folks, cool.
I hope that you enjoyed the show. Hope you found it informative and inspiring. And if you're a man, I hope you found it inspiring to just do the right thing, or at least wish that you do the right thing. That's the first step. The first step is saying, I hope in a situation that I'm presented that I do the right thing. Now, if you end up not doing it, fair enough. But don't rule it out right away. Don't rule it out because you're afraid that you might get in trouble. Bravery does not worry about the trouble that it's going to get into. That's not being brave. More importantly, only ask of others what you would be willing to do for them. And if you want somebody else to be there and potentially protect your family, your friends, your loved ones when you're not around, then be sure that you're willing to do the same thing. What goes around comes around. Pay it forward, whatever fancy phrase that you want to use. Say that and put it into your mind. All right, folks. I should be back tomorrow morning. We will see. It's a bit late for me, 9:17. I'm usually in bed by now because I usually get up at 5 a.m. So we will see. But be sure that you're subscribed to me on YouTube or on Rumble if you prefer. You can go to youtube.libertydad.com. You can go to rumble.libertydad.com. While you're there, throw me a comment. Let me know how I am doing. Last but not least, if you are a champion of liberty, your business is people and your product is liberty. I want you to have a great week. Catch you next time. But for now, I'm out.